Welcome to today's program. I'm Jennifer Urish, a member of the Jane Addams branch. Our program this morning, the Chicago branch's annual Meet the AAUW Fellows and Grantees, is presented in partnership with the Jane Addams branch. The AAUW Foundation, as one of the world's largest source of funding exclusively for graduate women, supports aspiring scholars worldwide. AAUW is providing more than $3.5 million in 2020-2021 in support of 200 scholars. Information about joining or donating to AAUW may be found on the website aauw.org, and I'll have those addresses later too. Today's program is being conducted as a webinar, so your video and audio are disabled. Please type any questions into the chat box, not the Q&A box, the chat box, and we'll address those at the end of each presentation. Also, as you know, we're recording, and we'll post this recording on the Jane Addams branch website. Now I'm going to turn it over to Megan Moser. She's president of the Chicago branch.
Hi, I'm Megan Moser. I'm the president of the Chicago branch. We have this event every year. We've had it for over 15 years to honor our local awardees of these scholarships and grants. And we just want to thank everybody for joining us. And I'll give it to Barb Thomas for introduction.
Thank you, Megan. I'm Barbara Thomas. I'm a member of the Chicago branch. I'm also a member of the Deerfield area branch of AAUW. My job is to introduce the speakers, so that's what I'm going to do right now. The first speaker is Kate Brunk. She is from the YWCA McLean County. She has a community action grant, and her project name is YW Strive. So welcome, Kate Brunk. Kate.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to share with you about YW Strive. I am the director of Labyrinth Made Goods, a program that YWCA McLean County started this year. It's a social enterprise that provides professional development, apprenticeships, and permanent employment to women who have experienced incarceration. And YW Strive is a piece of that. So I'm going to share my screen with you so I can use some images to tell a little bit of that story. So I wanted to introduce you to two of our apprentices and YW Strive participants, Hannah and Shay. Hannah and Shay both came to YWCA as clients of Labyrinth Outreach Services to Women. And that's a program that YWCA started a few years ago that provides outreach services and transitional housing to women in our community who have experienced incarceration and are voluntarily seeking some weird things happening, who are voluntarily seeking support to rebuild their lives. And we know that two of the biggest factors that prevent folks who have experienced incarceration from successfully rebuilding are lack of access to permanent stable housing and lack of access to living wage employment. And so through Labyrinth Outreach Services, we've been really working in the last few years to help folks secure stable housing, but we were really only able to offer job coaching and professional development on a one-on-one basis. And we saw the need for something that was more structured and could offer more opportunities for folks to get collaborative support and learn different skills in a group setting to really take them to the next level. So Hannah and Shay were both struggling to find work and retain employment, and it was really a struggle for them to find jobs that paid above minimum wage. So they chose to enroll in our pilot cohort of YW Strive, which is that professional development program that we designed around the needs of our clients like Hannah and Shay, but we've also opened up to our broader community, to all folks who face similar barriers to employment. YW Strive is really where we are focusing the funding that we received from AAUW's Community Action Grant. And that support from the grant has really been critical in ensuring that we've been able to partner with some local experts in developing our curriculum, because we wanted to provide meaningful learning opportunities and hands-on simulations for participants so that they could really transform their lives by taking that into their jobs in the workplace. And we knew that doing it alone would be much harder than using our existing resources. But we also know that nonprofits and other public institutions that were already offering those services, it would be difficult for them to partner with us and do so without some funding support so we could alleviate the staffing costs that they experienced. So through the AAUW grant, we've really been able to have some great partnerships come out of that. Our curriculum includes topics that are not always traditionally seen in professional development and workforce development programs. We focus a lot on basic digital skills for the workplace, including things like the Google Suite and Microsoft 365, learning how to use cloud storage and online collaboration tools successfully. We have an entire series on soft skills that I'm going to talk about in a minute. We also focus on financial independence and making sure folks know that when they get that gainful living wage employment, how to budget to properly reach their goals that they've set. We focus on leadership, teamwork and collaboration, and also presentation skills to help build confidence and empowerment in our participants. So the Community Action Grant specifically enabled us to partner with our local community college, Heartland Community College, to adapt a proven curriculum that they had already developed for soft skills for our community. Their program was really focused on addressing the needs of folks that were in the workforce, but maybe at an entry level and weren't able to kind of move past that, or were maybe struggling and their employer wanted them to get a little bit more professional development to help them be more successful. But the participants we wanted to capture really may not have any employment experience or may not have that stable employment experience to bring to the classroom setting. So we wanted to ensure that the curriculum we would present would be more inclusive of a broader variety of experiences and a broader variety of ways that people can gain transferable skills outside of the workplace. So we were able to leverage that local expertise and bring our two teams together to adapt their curriculum to meet other needs in our community because of this grant. We're also able to partner with a local expert in career coaching to develop materials for the career skills sessions. And that doesn't just include like resumes or interview skills like you would imagine. We were able to come up with new topics like team and meeting facilitation sessions so that folks really understand like, okay, if I have an opportunity for a promotion, am I going to have the confidence to be able to lead a team or lead a meeting? And how am I going to bring that knowledge and skill to the workplace so I could be considered for those opportunities? So we even have a session where they do like mock team facilitation where it's their responsibility to play different roles for each other as each of them lead their own meetings. And they get feedback not only from the other folks in the meeting, but also our facilitators so that they can, again, like hone those skills and practice those skills and do that deep reflection to help them be more successful. And then I just wanted to give you a little bit more information about why YW Strive is so important and how it fits within Labyrinth Made Goods and our ultimate goal to provide not only professional development, but actual like permanent employment opportunities to women who have experienced incarceration. So I want to bring it back to Hannah and Shay. So through their participation in YW Strive, Hannah and Shay began defining what they wanted their future to look like, and they started having the confidence to think beyond like the next 6 months. They started writing visions for the next 5 months and the next 10 months because visioning and goal setting are such an important part of our program. Then in September, we launched Labyrinth Made Goods, which is our nonprofit social enterprise that we founded to provide transitional employment opportunities for our Labyrinth clients, like Hannah and Shay, who have experienced incarceration and are successfully enrolled in the YW Strive program. So our business is a home fragrance company that we launched with 5 scented soy candles, and Hannah and Shay are working right now as our apprentices with our small staff, all of us are pictured here, to not only practice the skills that they're learning through YW Strive, but also to help us create a social enterprise that is serving the needs of other women like them in the future. So they're gaining crucial experience needed to gain that secure permanent employment, not only from the professional development program, but also from this transitional work experience. So as apprentices, Hannah and Shay use digital skills that they learned in YW Strive to help us on the business side with data tracking and internal communication. They're applying the sales and marketing skills that they learned through the entrepreneurship sessions in our program to help us create marketing and promotional campaigns for Labyrinth Made Goods. They're working towards their communication and customer service goals by shadowing meetings that we have with our suppliers and our retail partners. And soon they're going to actually be leading those meetings. And I'm so excited that in the next couple months, like, we're going to achieve that goal with them. So they're honing their leadership and management skills also by spearheading a project that we have to create a new product that we're releasing next spring. So they're going to have the opportunity to go into an interview and talk about how they took a product idea just from an idea and brought it to market successfully. And they're the ones who led us each step of the way to do that. So the skills that Hannah and Shay are able to receive from their apprenticeships is fairly unique among social enterprises that offer transitional employment programs. Often, social enterprises are only able to offer kind of like entry-level production manufacturing roles. But because we have the YW Strive piece in place, we are able to offer those like higher level business administration positions so that they really will be on track to gain those more lucrative and the more lucrative positions that will better position them to grow a career rather than just get one job. We're also fortunate to have a great local partner in production so that we can offer those employment experiences at those business administrative levels. And we know that the skills that Hannah and Shay are able to bring to our social enterprise are only going to make our business and our social enterprise more successful because they're the ones who have the lived experience of the clients and folks that we ultimately want to provide opportunities to through YWCA and Labyrinth Outreach Services. And we've also found that the confidence building that comes from participation in YW Strive leads many of our participants to start considering entrepreneurship themselves. So when Hannah and Shay both started in YW Strive, neither of them had ever thought of starting their own business. And now both of them are currently working on business plans for businesses that they would like to start in the next 5 years. It's really exciting to see the way their confidence has grown, but then also thinking about how they could become entrepreneurs, start businesses in our community themselves, and be the ones making the decisions about the kinds of employee policies that they have and how they would implement hiring practices to ensure that folks who have experienced incarceration aren't going to face the same discrimination that they do now. So that's kind of a summary of YW Strive and Labyrinth Made Goods, how it fits together. And I welcome any questions that you have. I also encourage you to check out our website if you want to learn more about Hannah and Shay and all of our staff. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate.
Hi. We have a couple of questions. So, are you giving your employees equity in the business? And explaining the accounting and business impact of their participation is one question.
Yeah, so we are not launching this as an LLC, it's a nonprofit. So any profits that we make are reinvested back into the business the program overall. So we're reinvesting all of our proceeds back into Labyrinth Made Goods and Labyrinth Outreach Services to continue providing those opportunities to women in the future. We are offering living wage employment even for our apprenticeships. Living wage employment is a little bit arbitrary for those of you who have looked into it too much, but we are offering wages that we expect other employers to offer to folks to help them meet their basic financial needs without having to access other services. And we're trying to be a leader in the community in that sense for sure. Oh, and what was the second part of the question? I think I missed it.
Are you explaining kind of the accounting and business impact of their actions? You know, so it's important to show up for work on time. It's important to participate fully, track the inventory, whatever, the accounting kind of.
Gotcha. So are they learning those pieces of the business? So they are 2 months into their positions, and so far they've really focused on just like understanding basic administrative skills and bringing those skills that I talked about into the workplace. And now we're in a position where they're transitioning to that higher level work with sales and marketing. And our next step is for me to bring them into the business administration piece with a lot of those things. So Hannah in particular is really interested in kind of numbers and data. So she's going to be the one probably spearheading those pieces. But in YW Strive, we have an entrepreneurship section where they understand and talk about different pieces of a business plan and how you write those, but also how that would actually be implemented if you were to start an actual business. So they're bringing that background with them so that they'll be better prepared to jump in and understand that. Yeah, for sure. And our finance department at YWCA is really eager to get them on board to start helping them, helping our finance folks, not only with like our Labyrinth Made Goods financial pieces, but also other opportunities for them to learn about how YWCA as an umbrella entity is tracking and managing finances across the organization.
And then let's see, two more questions. Will this company continue long-term, or was this just a study-related project? How many clients can you serve?
Yeah, so this was a community action grant. I'm not currently enrolled in an educational program, so I finished my master's a couple years ago. So this is this is a business we are growing to sustainability. YWCA is investing in this heavily to make it work. As you all probably know, it's really tough starting a business. It's really tough starting a business in a pandemic. But our ultimate goal, and I keep saying, like, we can't fail because it's so important, but also because we have so many amazing people working with us and the clients are so invested. But yes, we want this to be a long-term sustainable business that will be a new revenue stream to support these programs long-term, because we are kind of in that precarious situation. And then, again, I forget the second.
How many clients?
Oh, so right now, Hannah and Shay are our two business clients. We're also piloting apprentices. There are two business apprentices working directly with us. We're currently partnering with a local business to offer an apprenticeship to an additional Labyrinth client who's enrolled in YW Strive, and she's working with him to grow his business locally that he just started this year. So we're hoping that we'll be able to grow our impact, not only by growing as a business and being able to offer more of these apprenticeships, but also by partnering with local employers to support them in offering apprenticeships to our participants and clients as well. So, you know, we are paying living wages, and that's a really big expense, especially for a startup, but that's what we're investing in. It looks like right now we'll probably stay at about 3 apprentices until we're able to grow and become like more profitable and see our sales grow. And then the program side of it, we just with YW Strive, our goal is to serve over 100 women and people of color each year, just with the professional development piece, and then connecting them with employers and growing our relationships to help them better access permanent gainful employment.
Thank you. One last question. If you produce products like candles, do the participants learn about how to market these products?
100%. So they learn about sales and marketing and promotions in YW Strive. And Hannah and Shay are already, so we are getting ready to launch our holiday campaign around Thanksgiving time, as everyone does. And they have partnered directly with our sales and marketing manager to create that campaign, to talk through all the pieces. What are the different promotions we could offer? How are we going to communicate that? What are the graphics going to look like? And right now, they're really focused on developing that new product. And part of that product development process is also thinking about, like, how are we going to be able to market this alongside the other things that we have? And how are we going to make it fit into a cohesive brand so this new thing that we're doing doesn't seem completely different? So yeah, they are key parts of all of these pieces right now and will continue to be.
Thank you very much. That's all the questions we have right now.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you very much, Kate Brunk. Now our next presenter will be Marquita Dorsey. Marquita has an American Fellowship. She's working at Loyola University Chicago in social work, and her project is elevating the voices of Black adolescent females. Marquita, please.
Hi, thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to share some insight about my research and the support of AAUW. Again, I thank you all for this support. So I'm going to share my screen and begin to talk a bit about first the origins of this work, and then go into more details about the research itself, and then how AAUW will be supporting my efforts. So just to give a little bit of background, the overall overarching idea of my research is really about understanding the factors related to the sexual health and reproductive health of Black adolescent females, primarily those who live in urban communities. Many years ago, I started working with young women. This is an image of me presenting at a conference that was specifically around sexual violence and sexual health, and these particular workshops specifically for young girls, of which I enjoyed thoroughly. But I pulled this workshop from activities that several years ago at an organization that really piqued my interest in the well-being of Black adolescent females. And when I look at this image, I'm always reminded of my passion for the well-being of Black adolescent females, largely because of the risk and many protective factors that they experience in their life, but even more so the strengths that they have within them. So several years ago, I started working in an after-school setting where young women were exposed to enrichment activities before and after school. And many of those activities that I derived from that experience really made me aware of some of the challenges that they face in their life as a whole, but more specifically around their health and well-being, which has contributed to my research today. So specifically why Black girls are of critical interest and focus around my research. Their median onset of puberty occurs earlier compared to other girls. Popular culture's obsession with mature body types targets creates targets or creates this attention to consistent sexual harassment and exploitation for Black girls. And their experience with assault is much more prevalent than that of other groups of girls. The nature of sexual harassment for Black girls in school settings has been modestly explored, but their experience is much more prevalent than we might assume. Little is known about experiences outside of the school setting that impact Black girls' sense of safety, and largely, and what is more very important to my research is their sexual debut, sexual autonomy, and their experience with coming into their own healthy sexual identity. Daily exposure to verbal assaults related to sexuality and threats of physical violence are prevalent among Black girls that live in urban communities. And then culturally relevant adolescent development models are rare, specifically those that target developmental milestones of girls that grow up in and among a range of different adverse circumstances. What we do know about the risk to Black girls specifically is that they are twice as likely to be lured into sex trafficking, that they are disproportionately represented among these various social systems like the juvenile justice system as well as the child welfare system. And again, historically, hypersexuality is often associated with the Black female body. And it might also, as much research has contributed to understanding the impact of this hypersexual attention to Black female bodies, that it contributes or can contribute to a distorted self-imagery, which we realize is really important for adolescent females and their growth and development. We also know that social context matters to how they understand themselves and accept who they are becoming. As we understand, adolescence is a time of establishing autonomy and independence, and really understanding a difference between their actual selves, ideal selves, and false selves, which are common to the stage of adolescence. But racial and class inequalities or inequities really compound the sexual vulnerabilities that Black girls might experience. And so with all that said, in addition to my experiences working with young girls in both before and after school settings, as well as within communities of families that experience tremendous disadvantage, I went to the literature to see exactly what are many of these inequities and how they've changed over the years. But in addition to how they've changed over the years, what solutions have been proven to be effective empirically around the well-being of Black girls, and specifically buffers to sexual health disparities. And so some overarching questions I have, or a overarching question and some specific research questions I'd like to share. One overarching question really speaks to what are the protective factors related to sexual and reproductive behaviors of Black adolescent females, right? What are some things that might help or assist with their sexual and reproductive behaviors? And then what role do broad social systems and policies related to sexual health play in decision-making of Black adolescent females? And so what was very interesting, some time ago, I had a conversation with another scholar who asked the question about my research, and asked about why am I focused on Black girls solely? And the hope was that I was able to engage in work that looked at all experiences around sexual health and reproductive health of all girls. And I explained why, largely because of the historical trajectory of health disparities associated with Black females, adolescent females in particular. I find that based on my experience working with young girls in the community, that there is an obvious lack of research and literature surrounding their well-being. And this particular person said to me, as it relates to teen births and Black girls oftentimes being one of the groups with the highest teen birth rates, she suggested that it's always been that way. And I said, then, does that make it right? Does that mean that we should not invest more attention and time in buffering this experience, since we all know that an early teen birth contributes to later in life, oftentimes deleterious outcomes later in life? So much of my specific research questions really target how do we invest, or why we need to invest in greater attention to this particular subgroup. Also, how does familial support matter to sexual health and well-being of Black adolescent females, primarily those who live in urban communities? But I'm also very interested in how fathers matter. There's a tremendous amount of research that focuses on the benefits of fathers in the lives of their sons. But in my experience personally, as well as those in the communities that I work with, fathers often find themselves and others to be a benefit to the community, and especially the lives of their daughters. So largely, I explore risk and protective factors related to the health and well-being of Black adolescent females, and in a range of different areas, specifically though, regarding health disparities, whether it is teen birth, STI contraction, condom use, sexual debut. I also look at community influences, right? So I'm not just thinking about the fact that, okay, Black girls are having these experiences disproportionate to other girls, but I don't make the assumption that it's innate or it's just how it is. Instead, I look at what factors around them, what's contributing to them making the decisions that they make. For example, system involvement, whether or not being engaged in the child welfare system at any point during their childhood really matters. Familial influences, what people in their families matter more, or what are these individuals in their families doing to help assist them in making the best sexual health choices. Also social networks, right? Peers, we know peers make a difference, but in what way, if we're talking about a young woman who is living in a community that might be laden with a range of risk, how then do peer interactions and other social networks really matter to her decisions? And then community-based research. So often we know that research can sometimes come into communities and place the research on that community. Instead, I'm very interested in engaging community partners in this work. The title of my project, looking at elevating the voices of Black girls, speaks to that very point, that I am very interested in allowing my research to be a platform for Black adolescent female voices. And so this particular grant, thankfully, again, I'm grateful, is based on pilot study findings where I conducted semi-structured interviews with Black adolescent females and young adult females ages 15 to 22. And with this grant, I will have the opportunity to develop knowledge or produce peer-reviewed manuscripts regarding the cultural relevant risk and protective factors most important to Black adolescent females, which is critically important. As I mentioned before, there is less literature regarding the well-being of Black adolescent females, and more specifically around sexual health and what protective factors exist, including their own individual strengths. The fellowship will result in manuscripts, of course, that highlight which contextual factors and which protective factors matter most to their sexual health behavior and their decision-making, specifically, again, for those Black adolescent females that live in underserved communities. And so some ideas of the manuscripts that I intend or are in the works include how community dynamics matter to sexual health decision-making, or key perspectives of Black adolescent females related to sexual risk factors. Again, because my interest is to ensure that their voices are heard, I want to ensure that their perspective is also echoed and that people are able to see and hear exactly what they're saying. How social media influences sexual health behavior, how is sexual health decision-making qualified? It might be assumed that this is how adolescent females make decisions around their sexual health. However, if a young woman is growing up in a community, again, laden with a range of risk, how she navigates that community might also impact how she makes decisions around her sexual health, in addition to the range of resources or the lack thereof might also contribute to the decision-making process. And so we don't really understand what that's like for a Black adolescent female. And it's really important that we do in order for us to inform evidence-based research for the future. Understanding familial protective factors related to sexual health decision-making is really important. Again, as I mentioned, I am very interested in the role that fathers play in their daughters' decision-making around their own sexual health, and the benefits of that. As we know, historically, Black families have not always gotten the best rap around protective factors. And so I'm eager to see how fathers really matter regarding that relationship. And then exploring the role of Black father-daughter relationships to decision-making as a whole. And so I welcome any questions. I am passionate about this work. I've worked with young girls for many years, particularly in community-based settings, and I value the feedback that families, particularly families that live in underserved communities, share about their life experience. Thank you.
Cindy?
Hi. So, yeah, I'm sorry. Barbara?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So we have,
Questions?
yes, we have some questions. Where in Chicago do you work, if we can ask? Do you also think about the role of friendship between Black girls?
Yes, I appreciate that question. The pilot study itself derived a sample from a small sample from Chicago, as well as in another metropolitan area outside of Chicago. And I intend to continue to obviously work in Chicago since I'm here. But the intent is that I'm able to look across the city and not just in one concentrated area. In terms of friendships, I am eager to understand how, again, peer networks are part of their social network and how that matters to their decision-making. What types of peer relationships, what types of social networks matter most.
Okay, and then was asked, I wonder if you can talk a bit more about what you know thus far about the role of fathers versus mothers related to sexual health and well-being.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question also. So currently in the literature, there is some attention to how mothers' communication matters, especially in single female-headed households. And considering a disproportionate number of Black families are headed by Black women without fathers living in the home, I'd like to emphasize that it doesn't suggest that Black fathers are not involved in their children's lives simply because they don't live in the home. Instead, this relationship matters differently for Black families, which really speaks to why I'm even more interested, because there have been some research recently that suggests that Black fathers are more involved compared to other groups, considering his non-resident status. As far as mothers, in terms of sexual health communication, sexual communication, mothers with regards to their relationship status often buffers whether or not this communication occurs more often than not. And so based on some current research, mother's communication or sexual communication matters based on the condition or the state of the relationship with their daughter. And then sexual communication with fathers, that literature is lacking with regards to fathers living outside of the home.
Okay. When do you expect to publish results?
Yeah, I know I like to know that definite answer too. However, I have, at the moment, I have 2 publications under review, and I've recently received 1 publication. Now, the beautiful part about this is that these results are preliminary, and this is giving me, because of this, this fellowship, I have time to work on the results and continue to write the manuscripts as a result of my final results from this study. And so the expectation is that my remaining manuscripts, particularly the ones that I've listed, will be placed under review at the beginning of next year, 2021. And so the process of publication tends to be 1 year to 1.5 years, sometimes depending on the journal.
And then how do you define sexual health?
In my research, I'm defining sexual health as based on the CDC definition, really speaks to their access to resources and how their access to resources and the results of that access to resource, as well as their sexual outcomes. And so the sexual health outcomes really speak to the level of sexual health that is ascribed to these girls. So for example, their experience with STIs, their experience with teen births, their experience with or without access to sexual health resources like condoms, education around how to protect themselves. And so all of that is encompassed in my definition of sexual health.
How does socioeconomic status affect the girls' decisions? Do you study across different levels?
Well, that's the expectation, is that I am exploring that all the more. Because there is a lack of literature across these various domains, so from lower income families to middle income families to higher income families, because of course they all exist within the Black community, understanding how a lack of resources that often is associated with communities or among communities with families with lower incomes. I am most curious about how girls, for example, girls that don't get pregnant that live in these communities, all right, what are some of the things that you're doing to safeguard yourself, or what are some of the protective factors in your life that matter most? And so my primary focus is those that live in lower income communities for that reason. Ultimately, I'm sure that I will eventually get to looking across the levels of socioeconomic status.
Do you find a difference between 2-parent families and single parent who is a father?
I would say, based on my earlier comments, because the literature historically has focused on the deficits of Black families, there is a lack of literature that really looks at the assets that non-resident fathers offer. And so my research, I hope, will unveil some of the benefits to how Black families matter in these circumstances, whether it is two-parent family or single-parent family. Because there is an increasing amount of literature that's focusing on the role of non-resident fathers as it relates to Black family function, I'm hoping that I can demonstrate empirically the value of Black fathers to their children, specifically their daughters, when they live outside the home. So do I find that there are differences, since I am interested in this particular group, which disproportionately represents non-resident fathers? At this moment, I can't state whether or not empirically I've identified a difference.
Okay, can you talk about your education and journey to your PhD?
Sure. I grew up in Tennessee, and I myself had a father that was involved in my life, who both my mom and my dad placed a tremendous emphasis on pursuing education. We did grow up fairly poor, which exposed me to a range of both risk and protective factors, although I grew up in a rural community in Tennessee. I also I started out at a historically Black college, and I graduated from a predominantly white institution, where I went on to, many years later, pursue my master's in social work at USC and my PhD at UCLA. And between my MSW, where I was exposed to community-based research, and even more so, mortality rates among Black women in America, I became more interested in the experiences of those Black women and Black families throughout South Los Angeles. And so I started working for both the mayor's office, where I was engaged in community work with families and in more disenfranchised communities, where I was then exposed to the voices of both Black mothers and Black fathers and their perspectives about the sexual health of Black girls, which then triggered my interest, a greater interest in the sexual health and well-being of Black girls. And then I pursued my PhD, and then I graduated. Here I am. And then I moved to Chicago.
Thank you, Marquita. Cindy, thank you. And thank you, Marquita.
Thank you.
I'm going to.
Can I ask 2 quick more questions?
Okay.
Sure.
Are you exploring the rate of mortality for births to Black women and girls?
At the moment, I am not, but it will inevitably become a part of my research, considering that rate has been a very popular point of focus for it recently. But I would like to add that mortality rate has been consistent since the 90s, the early 90s, and our focus now is helpful. And I intend to focus on that at some point throughout my research.
And then last question, you mentioned ideal and false self-image. Can you explain these terms?
Sure. As a pivotal point in adolescent development, adolescents go through a stage where they are figuring out what we consider a tumultuous state of development, but one that I value greatly and am fascinated by adolescent development. But a part of that time of exploration, they are also attempting to understand themselves and the identity that they have developed over the years, or have come to be exposed to, whether it's because of various models in their life, parents, peers, teachers, or what have you, and all this information collectively in the mind of an adolescent that we all know so far that neurologically the brain is not fully developed. And so while it is in that stage of figuring out things, they are also trying to figure out who they are. And so their actual self is who they see, who they know to be true before them. Who their false self is, it really speaks to how they might navigate across different environments to be who they think others might want them to be. And then their ideal self is based on what we might think of as who they might envision themselves to be. And oftentimes some young people might have a greater sense of ideal self than others might have because of their exposure to a range of different models and because of mentoring and all these other frameworks that we've used in social work, especially to promote the ideal self. So who they might hope to become really speaks to their ideal self and the level of who they hope to be.
Thank you again, Martina.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you for the
Barbara,
question.
can I ask one more question? And then we'll move on. I got one more question. Have you studied whether the presence of other siblings or birth order matters?
No, I have not studied birth order and how other siblings matter, but I do think that that would be an interesting direction.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I'd like to now introduce Michelle Friedner. Michelle has an American fellowship. She's currently working at the University of Chicago in medical anthropology, and her project name is Becoming Normal. This deals with deafness and cochlear implants in India. So Michelle, please.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to share my work. If you guys are having trouble hearing me or if I'm speaking too quickly, please let me know. You can type it in the chat box and somebody can just let me know. So I'm a medical anthropologist, which means that I study the ways that medicine is a culture in and of itself, and that medical knowledge is also cultural knowledge. However, the research that I do is very much non-medical, and I say non-medical in quotes, because you could argue that everything is medical. So my initial research looked at the experiences of deaf young adults in India, specifically in Bangalore, which is in South India, and the experiences of desiring there to be more Indian Sign Language in the world. And I looked at how they tried to create inhabitable worlds and futures that were based upon the use of Indian Sign Language. And the people who I worked with often talked about deaf development. And I'm showing an image right here from my previous book in which there's a woman who is signing development. And deaf people often talked about the importance of deaf development or more sign language based ways of being in the world, more schools that use sign language, more jobs where people can use sign language, and more deaf cultural institutions. So I did this research from 2007 to 2015. And when I went back to India in 2016 to share my book results with people in the field, I learned about Indian government programs providing below poverty line children with cochlear implants. For those of you who don't know, a cochlear implant is considered a gold standard intervention in the area of deafness. And it basically involves a surgery where I have a stuffed animal of a cochlea here, but it involves a surgery where the surgeon wraps an electrode array around the cochlea. This is the cochlea. So there's an electrode array that's wrapped around it. And then it's connected with an external processor that takes sounds and then they are transmitted into sort of electrical impulses that go directly into the cochlea and then to the brain, and they're a way of bypassing the auditory nerves. And cochlear implants are manufactured right now by 4 multinational corporations. One is in Australia, one is in Austria, one is in the US, and one is in France. There are indigenous cochlear implants that are being developed in China and also in India, but they are not quite ready yet. And so these are multinational corporations that develop these technologies. And so the Indian government, the Indian central government, and then Indian state governments have programs providing below poverty line children with implants, and then with 2 years of follow-up, meaning 2 years of mapping of the device and 2 years of therapy, because therapy is needed to learn how to hear with this device, with the implant. And so what's really interesting to me is that this cochlear implant surgery and 2 years of follow-up care is the most expensive intervention that the Indian government and state governments are making into the realm of disability and deafness. And when I interviewed government officials in India, they told me, well, the reason we're doing this is because cochlear implants cure deafness. So cochlear implants make a deaf child normal. You know, this is the best intervention that we have in the realm of disability for making children normal. And so I became very interested in thinking about, you know, what does it mean to provide below poverty line children with such an expensive device? And what does this also mean for how we think about questions of what does it mean to be deaf? What does it mean to be normal? What does it mean to be almost normal? What does it mean to be near to normal? And so on. So I decided to do research on cochlear implants. And what I decided to do was to look at, you know, the experiences of multiple stakeholders in terms of cochlear implants. So I did research with government officials who both designed and administer this program. I did research with surgeons, so I conducted interviews with surgeons who are now cochlear implant surgeons. I conducted interviews with people from the corporations who manufacture and distribute these implants, and specifically I interviewed them at their India headquarters and at their headquarters in their home country. I did interviews and participant observation during therapy sessions and talked with therapists. And I also, and perhaps most importantly, worked with families and children and looked at how they worked with these devices and how they made sense of these devices. And so what I'm doing right now is I am finishing a book manuscript in which I look at, you know, the emergence of this government program and the emergence of also a private market of cochlear implantation. And I'm thinking about, what does it mean? You know, what does it mean for how we think about deafness and disability, and again, normality? And I want to share some of my findings with you. So one thing that I found, which I'm very interested in, is the ways that cochlear implants do ostensibly create normal hearing in a sound booth environment. So for those of you who don't know, the goal of cochlear implant is essentially to get somebody into what's called the speech banana of an audiogram. So I have an audiogram right here, okay? And there's a part of the audiogram that is up here between 20 and 60 decibels, and that is considered to be the speech banana, and that's where all speech sort of sounds are. And the goal of a cochlear implant is to get you into that speech banana, which is great. However, I'm really interested in thinking about, well, what are all the other sounds? What are all the other ways of relating that are not based on sound? What does it mean that we are so focused on trying to get children into this narrow zone of life, of sociality, of ways of being in the world? And my project is really interested in thinking about multimodal engagement and the ways that we actually do engage in multimodal and multisensory ways. Also with cochlear implants, there's a means of therapy called auditory verbal therapy that was started in the US and in Canada and in the UK. And auditory verbal therapy is based upon trying to force deaf children to hear. So it's based on trying to force children to orient to the world or to engage the world through audition. And mothers are taught, because it is always mothers, and mother blame and mother responsibility is a big part of my research, looking at the ways that mothers are being taught that they have to provide therapy or engage in therapeutic talk for pretty much 24 hours a day, almost. So mothers are supposed to constantly talk, and children are supposed to listen, and not only that, but mothers are often supposed to talk by covering covering their hands or looking away or doing something so that their lips are not visible, because the goal is to get a child to, again, listen, to use their auditory sense, to become unisensory, because it's only through becoming unisensory initially that they can eventually become multisensory. And I'm very concerned about that. What does this mean for mothers? What does this mean for their relationships with their children? And what does it mean that children are being taught to orient to the world through one sense? And again, I'm very interested in thinking multimodally and sensorily, and also multi-relationally, because this is all about relationships between mothers and children, relationships between mothers, children, and therapists, and relationships between the state, because the state is providing the sense, and families, and the relationship between the state, families, and multinational corporations. Another thing that's very interesting is that families, they receive 2 years of follow-up in terms of training and in terms of accessories for the devices. Accessories meaning cables, coils, batteries, replacement devices if the device breaks. But then after 2 years, these families are on their own, and they now are required to enter into relationships with these multinational corporations, and they often struggle to afford these accessories. As a government audiologist told me, this program is specifically for children and families who cannot afford these devices. And so it becomes a question of what happens after the devices fail, or stop working. How are these families going to be able to afford to maintain these devices? And I want to point out that maintenance is a really important concept. We as a society and as a world are so focused on thinking about innovation, but how do we think about maintenance practices? And how do we think about the work that it takes, in this case, to maintain a sense, to maintain a device, and to maintain a relationship? There's a medical anthropologist named Mary Jo Delvecchio Good, and she talks about what she calls the biotechnical embrace, and the ways that doctors, medical professionals, and people in the world like these high-tech devices, that we feel like we're being embraced by them, and that we embrace them in return. But my question is, what happens when the embrace becomes a strangle, or when the embrace stops being an embrace? How do we negotiate that? And families in the field told me that, this is a lifetime relationship that they have with these devices. But then they also say, and we can't get divorced. I've talked to families who have said, I feel like I'm in a hostage situation with these companies. So these are some of the issues that I am thinking about. And I think it's very important to think about this right now, especially because, as I've said, cochlear implants are considered a gold standard intervention. I'm sure that many of you have seen videos on YouTube or elsewhere on social media of a child being activated with their implant. So the implant is turned on, the mother says something, the child turns to the mother starts crying, and it's this wonderful, heartwarming moment. And these moments are very communicable, and they circulate a lot on social media. And to me, I'm interested in thinking about, okay, so this is the beginning of something, but what is it the beginning of? When implants are activated, what are the other things that we need to think about? I also think that this is really important to think about in terms of identity. So as many of you probably know, there are deaf people who identify as deaf with a capital D. They think about the importance of deafness as a linguistic minority and deafness as an identity. And so what's interesting is that there has been research that has shown that people with cochlear implants no longer identify with the deaf community, and they don't actually identify as non-disabled or normal either, but they identify with the disability community. And cochlear implants bring up all these questions around identity. What does it mean to be an implanted person? Are you a deaf hearer? Are you a hearing deaf person? Are you a normal person? What are you? You know, and these are questions that are increasingly coming up, not only in India, but also around the world. Because again, cochlear implants are a gold standard intervention. And for me, I want to think about, what are the ways that they enable being in the world, but also what are ways that they constrain being in the world. And my mode in terms of engaging with cochlear implant is one of ambivalence. I'm very interested in thinking ambivalently about cochlear implants. I'm not trying to adjudicate and say whether they're good or bad, but rather to point out the complex dependencies and the complex forms of relationality that develop through them. So I think that's all that I will say for now, but I look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Cindy, questions?
Yes, we have a few, and she just touched on this. I don't know if you want to expand on it, but how do cochlear implants relate to the idea of deaf culture? And you were talking about that. Are you a deaf person if you can now hear? Are you still, anyway,
Yeah,
the question was how do cochlear implants relate to the idea of deaf culture?
this is a super important question. And I think for me, what's interesting is that deaf culture is often held up as this thing, the boogeyman, by people who are supporters of cochlear implants and who are supporters of auditory verbal therapy, because they say, oh, there's this thing called deaf culture, and deaf people who are members of deaf culture can only communicate with each other, because they use sign language. And that's not actually true. Deaf people move through the world, and people who are members of deaf culture move through the world. And for me, I think it's really important to consider that people can belong to multiple deaf cultures and multiple hearing cultures and multiple other kinds of cultures. And I think in the past, initially, the National Association for the Deaf in the United States, in 1991, they came out with a position statement that was very much against cochlear implants. They talked about it as being irresponsible, as a form of potential genocide against deaf people, as something that was deeply unethical. However, they revised that statement to recognize cochlear implants as a tool in enhancing communication and language. And now they don't have a position statement at all. But the debates right now in the US and elsewhere in the Western world are very much about language and access to language. And there are many, many, many examples of children who have been implanted who have not had access to language and who have experienced language deprivation. And so the debate is really about, making sure that these children have access to language, And I will say that, cochlear implants are not incompatible with deaf culture. If you go to Gallaudet University in the United States in Washington, D.C., which is one of the main sort of sites of deaf culture in the US, you will see lots of students and faculty with cochlear implants. So thank you for that question.
Cindy, any more questions?
Yes, I have 4 more questions, one of which sounds like it's asked of all the panelists. So the ones specifically here, are you studying other countries besides India?
Yes. So right now, the project is looking at India, and I mean, it is kind of a comparative project in the sense, not comparative, but there is a sense that, auditory verbal therapy is an international therapy technique. You know, best practices are here in the US and the UK and Australia. And as part of the project, I got funding from the National Science Foundation, and I will be traveling to Australia to the headquarters of Cochlear Company, which is the manufacturer of one of the implants. And I will also be looking at auditory verbal therapy practitioners there. Eventually, so I'm also interested in looking at what's happening surrounding India, because Pakistan also has a government program, Sri Lanka has a government program, and Bangladesh does as well. So I'm interested in looking at what's happening in the surrounding countries. But beyond that, the next stage of this project is actually going to be in Scandinavia, because what I've been learning is that, for example, in Denmark, cochlear implants have become such a standard practice that deaf schools, specifically signing deaf schools, have closed, and parents have been ordered to implant their children in courts of law. And people who are parts of deaf communities, specifically signing deaf communities in Denmark, are very concerned about what this means for deaf futures, or for ways of thinking about the world in the future in which deafness is still a part of the world. So I'm hoping to travel and to do research in Scandinavia as well.
How many children are born to need a cochlear implant in India, US, and other countries?
In fact, I like the way that need is in quotes. Thank you for that. So I'm not quite sure about the numbers. I think it varies from country to country. Yes, I should know this. I don't have it off the top of my head. I have it in my book appendix, but I think it's something about maybe 3 or 4% of children are born deaf or hard of hearing. And then of that number, it becomes a question of what are the criteria for, or the eligibility criteria for implantation. So I think it really depends on country. In India, there are certain regions in which the prevalence of deafness is higher because of family intermarriage and consanguinity. And so I think it varies, but I think 3 to 4% might be a reasonable way of thinking about it.
Okay. Did the government speak to the reasons for providing the cochlear implants? You know, and what is the impact to the children after the 2 years of follow-up when they can't afford the equipment needed?
Yeah, so the government, what's interesting about the Indian state is, so we think about the Indian state as a post-colonial state, right? And the way that India in particular engages with disability is through distribution. So the government distributes things like calipers, hearing aids, wheelchairs, crutches, canes, and so on. And they give out disability pensions, reduced fare bus passes, and other such things. And this is something, by the way, that disability rights advocates in India and internationally are very concerned about, because they want rights. You know, they want programs and policies and non-discrimination clauses, and not things or devices. But the Indian state has always engaged through distribution. And for them, the cochlear implant is the best device that they can possibly distribute for disability. And they talk about it in terms of disability in general, because as they said, it makes a child normal. And the initial expense is only an initial expense. And it means that later on, ostensibly, they won't have to have that child in a special school for the deaf. They won't have to provide sign language interpreters, and so on. This idea that this child is now normal and doesn't need anything afterwards. However, as we know from my research and from other research, that's not the case, right? That there is maintenance that needs to take place. And very often these children do go off year. And what that means is that they stop using these devices, and they wind up often in worse shape than they were before, because now they don't have access to language in an accessible way. You know, and one thing that I didn't mention is that parents in India are not given a range of options for providing their children with other ways of being in the world. So one thing that I found consistently in my research is that parents are not told about Indian Sign Language, you know, or they're told that the gesture that they use with their children is Indian Sign Language, which is not true. That there's something called Indian Sign Language, and that is a way of teaching a child language and a way of teaching a child to be a person in the world. And so that is a source of concern.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Michelle.
There's one, Barbara, maybe you can help me by speaking to each of the panelists. One last question was, as you devise your research, how does your own experience affect the questions you ask and the answer you presume, and what surprises you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I came to medical anthropology and disability studies and deaf studies because I worked with a law firm before I did my PhD. And when I was doing that, I became very interested in disability rights and deaf rights. And when I went to India for the first time, I interacted with disability advocates in India and became very interested in the ways that the discourses and desires and goals are the same. And I wanted to think about the ways that these circulate or not transnationally, and what is specifically Indian about disability rights and deaf rights and disability experiences and deaf experiences in India. I can say that I myself am a person, I grew up deaf. I used hearing aids. When I was in my 30s and 40s, I decided to get few implants. I got one implant in 2010 when I was finishing my first research. And I decided to get the second implant actually very casually in the midst of this research because my insurance company wouldn't pay for a second hearing aid, but they would pay for a cochlear implant. And so I thought, okay, why not, you know? And so I will say, you know, my own mode of engagement, as I said, is very ambivalent. I bring my own experience to the table. I can say that when I do my research in India, it's actually super interesting because I interact with parents, and very often I am the first deaf adult that they're meeting, you know, and they'll say, oh, wow, we're really excited to meet you because we've never met a deaf adult before, or we've never met a deaf adult with implants before, or so on, you know. And so to me, you know, my own experience very much shapes my research. And I will say that when I do my research with the Cochlear Corporation, because I have 2 cochlear devices, I will demand access to them, you know, and I think that this industry is very much a secretive industry in the sense that people don't like to say, you know, what their numbers are. And that's also really interesting that, you know, so the government keeps really careful tabs on the numbers of surgeries they've done, but they don't do any follow-up. So for them, it's like, okay, we've done the surgery, we're done, you know. And the companies also, I mean, I think they do keep follow-up, but they will not disclose their numbers. And they also will not disclose their marketing plans because there's so much competition between these 4 companies, and I guess the profit margins are so thin, and there are constantly lawsuits about intellectual property. And so it's been really interesting to try to think about access. And for me, I would say that my positionality as a cochlear user, or as they say, recipient, means that I do feel entitled to some of that information.
Interesting behind the scenes information there.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you.
And then, can I ask Kate Brunk the same question?
I think we're.
Can we take a little more time?
I think we're kind of running out of time. We've got one more presenter, Cindy. So maybe after we finish with.
Oh,
Kelly.
I'm sorry.
So I'm going to introduce Kelly.
Okay.
Kelly Fair is our Community Action Grant recipient. She works with Reflections Foundation. It's a mentoring program called Polished Pebbles, and the project name is Pink Hard Hats. Kelly, please.
Good morning, everyone. Just want to thank you so much for your time, and just really grateful to have the opportunity to be here, but also to sit through all of these wonderful presentations to hear about a lot of the good work that's going on with these great professionals and my colleagues this morning. So as she mentioned, I'm Kelly Fair. I'm the founder and executive director of Polished Pebbles Girls Mentoring Program. And for me, I have a passion for helping girls to become successful in their future lives and their future careers. And I achieve that by helping them sculpt their future professional voices. I founded Polished Pebbles 11 years ago with the mission of helping girls to become great communicators at home, great communicators at school, and great communicators for the future workplace. For me, thinking about communication is a passion of mine for a variety of different reasons. I've been in education for over 20 years, but I've also had the opportunity to work in educational publishing and manage national marketing, and I'm also a speech pathologist by training. But for me, there's a real passion for communication and thinking about that skill with girls because I was a shy girl. When I was in 3rd and 4th and 5th grade, I loved going to school. I loved answering questions in class. I was proud that I was advanced from 3rd grade math to 5th grade math, and there was no issues. But once I got to 6th grade, me, like many other girls, my self-esteem took a nosedive. And that self-esteem nosedive is no respecter of socioeconomic status, ethnic or racial background, location. It's just something that the research says happens to a lot of girls. And so with that, I lost a lot of my leadership skills. But for me, there were certain tools and opportunities out there that really helped save me and provided a great inspiration. One of which was I was a girl who grew up in the pages of Essence magazine. At that time, Essence magazine was the only place, and it was a magazine for African-American women where you could see powerful images of Black women who were mothers, who were career women. They were beautiful, they were gorgeous, they were smart, they were in politics, and they had careers. And that had a profound effect on me that I very much saw myself as an Essence woman. And so when I got to a certain stage and started learning more about the world, and I heard about this thing because I was a kid that grew up in the late 80s and the 90s, and there was this day called Take Your Daughter to Work Day. I heard about it. I had decided upon myself that was something I was going to take advantage of. I asked my dad, could I go to work with him that day? And I was in. I knew I would get out of school, get free McDonald's for lunch, and get a chance to hang out with my dad and get a chance to see what his day at work was like. So it was a great day. When I fast forward and think about where my path had been, I always wanted to work. And at 13, I had my very first job. At that time, I thought I wanted to be a cosmetologist. And so my mom flipped through the yellow pages because there were no smartphones back then and found Dudley's Beauty College right on the south side of Chicago, as I'm a native daughter of the south side. And she called up. The director of Dudley's took me in as an intern. I got paid nothing, but I was there for 2 half days for that entire summer, and I was happy to be in the mix. Anything they asked me to do in this work environment that meant a lot to me, I did. I shampooed hair, I put hair gel in cups, I cleaned the stock room, and they put me on the cash register. By putting me on that cash register, it did something profound for me. It broke me out of my shyness. When women have been standing in line to get their hair done and getting ready for the rest of their busy lives, there is no room for the shy girl who can't speak up and say her name clearly and proudly. And that experience really had a profound impact upon me to helping me find my leadership skills. And then in that work environment, I was mentored. The women in the beauty college said, you know what? Hey, here's how you should dress in the workplace. You know what, Kelly? Find your voice. You got to speak up and project your voice. And they said, you know, we know you're interested in this as a possibility for a future career, but still don't not think about college. Where's some places that you like to think about there as well? They mentored me. And that particular experience had a profound effect on me from that point on, throughout high school, throughout college, where I was really blessed to have strong female work supervisors who mentored me. So when you fast forward to 2009, when I decided to take it upon myself after being mentored and invested in by these women, and as a grown woman, I felt like this was also my responsibility to invest in the girls in my community. And so I started Polished Pebbles. But I got to thinking about that Take Your Daughter to Work Day. I got to thinking about those first work experiences that I had. And I thought about the girls in the communities that I serve. Take Your Daughter to Work Day, most of their parents don't have the kind of careers that can afford them that type of opportunity or job shadow days. And so essentially with Polished Pebbles, that became a core part of how we achieved our mission. We sought to be a career pipeline from the schoolyards to the future workplace by providing these job shadow-like experiences for girls. It became the campus that they put together all the different life skills and communication skills that we would teach girls in after school and school day programs and at community center sites. And so we've been fortunate enough to provide this kind of campus and job shadows with a variety of local, national, and global businesses in an impressive partner portfolio that includes retailers like Bloomingdale's, Nordstrom's, technology companies like Microsoft, Blue Cross Blue Shield, the Hyatt, architectural and engineering firms. And of course, I'm going to talk some today about construction firms, et cetera, and even the restaurant industry. The list goes on. So with this partnership portfolio and thinking about 11 years of Polished Pebbles, where we started off just as a monthly Saturday program with 2 girls, we've grown the program to serve over 5,000 girls here in Illinois and Indiana. We've done some work in Texas and also worked with undergraduate young women of color down at Duke University through their Women's Center. And so we've got an impressive track record of success, and we make sure that we invest not only in making sure that we're providing best practices in our service delivery, but we've worked through the University of Chicago Community Accelerator Program to do that in their inaugural cohort program. We've been a part of the Bank of America Global Ambassadors Program to think really intently about our space as a social enterprise and nonprofit, and then also been in Goldman & Sachs, and we're a Gold Star program in the state of Illinois as well. So I know that I'm speaking to our audience this morning that is well aware of the challenges that girls are facing, women are facing in the city of Chicago, across the country, and also globally. So we're always talking about the gaps, the gender gaps, right? We talk about the gender pay gap. We talk about the gender leadership gap. Well, for the girls that we serve, predominantly here in these communities throughout Chicago, Northwest Indiana, there's some other gaps that they're facing. And one of the gaps that I like to think about, and I've kind of coined the term myself, is the hope gap. And I call it the hope gap because often when we come into girls and talk to them about getting job shadows, preparing for summer internships, after school jobs, they feel like that gap to get there, that gap for success when we bring in role models who are successful in their careers, seems to be something that's so unattainable. And it makes sense when you look around in their communities, if they're not being able to explore and be exposed to beyond the 4 to 6 blocks in their communities, you can see where that can be a challenge. When you look in their communities and you see the divestment and you see the under-resourced schools and opportunities and materials and experience there, you can understand why the girls, when we're preparing them for these jobs and saying, they want you, they'll need you, they say, no, they don't want us. And so that's a heartbreaker, but it's really been the fire in my belly to continue me and my team and a network of over 500 volunteers and professional and community volunteers to really push through and help our girls get through and close that hope gap and that achievement gap that exists there as well. The other challenges girls are up against is we're well aware when we talk about the school to prison pipeline for Black and brown boys, we're well aware about the violence challenges, but the news headlines often only focus on those plights of low-income Black boys. But in Polished Pebbles, we call it the other side of the crisis. The other side of the crisis is these girls, our girls, are growing up in the same communities. They're facing the same threats of violence as the boys, needing to protect themselves physically and their safety, but their reputation as well. And so as a result, in addition to that too, they're facing media, social media, and many of the things that my colleague Marquita spoke to in her presentation earlier that all have negative impacts on their of self-identity and how they feel like they can achieve in the future. And so in the other side of the crisis, you can see it in core numbers. Black girls, more than any other group of girls, are actually facing higher rates of school expulsions, detentions, and suspensions, and even in many cases surpassing those of Black boys. And then out of school confinement numbers are growing tremendously for Black girls as well. So there's definitely a crisis. There's definitely a need to focus on supporting them. And we at Polished Pebbles have been really intentional about helping to close that hope gap by focusing on social emotional learning, leadership development through mentoring, and also actually workforce development and practical applications and practice there. So I'm going to share a couple of slides because I want to transition quickly to just speak about this Pink Hard Hats project that we plan to use this award to support. Share my screen. All righty. All right. So I've spoken a little bit already about the hope gap that, we are helping to help our girls bridge. And so with our work with Polished Pebbles and over these 11 years, we've been in over 100 public schools, over 100 charter schools, over, that number also includes public housing communities as well, working with elementary school students, middle school students, and high school students as well. And so working directly with school partners, you get to the point where you got to have these real conversations, being a community, a practical application of services. And so part of what we've realized over time is that there's some core skills that we can provide from a Polished Pebbles perspective and leadership development and soft skills development to help aid some gaps that they're there in career and technical education programs in schools. And so we looked at key times in high school that students need some additional touch points of hours of social emotional learning, of mentoring, needing soft skills when they're in the classroom preparing for future or after school or summer jobs, as they're going through the application and interview process, or when they're actually on the job in summer internships or preparing for training after school. We figured out that there's about 70 to 150 additional hours of mentoring, of social emotional learning, of leadership development, and hands-on practical application in the workplace that students really could use to actually be successful in obtaining strong post-secondary education, post-secondary career opportunities. And so we've been really working within our, realm to identify milestones of success within the girls that we've worked with. One of our first mentees has actually been a Fulbright fellow studying in Italy, and now she's in her first semester at law school at Yale. We've been in, of course, in practice for well over 10 years. And we also look at other milestones of success. We're in the midst of COVID-19, right? And so there's so many challenges with remote learning. There's so many economic challenges that many families are facing. So when it comes to summer employment, after school employment, for our girls, it's not just something to have extra cash to, buy the things that they like to have. Summer and after school employment become critical pieces of income and revenue that come into their families' homes as well. And so we've been very proud that in certain summers, we have helped girls employ over 200 girls, whether it's employing them through our own work study programs or helping them get to employ in other places throughout the city as well. So that brings us to our Pink Hard Hats project, which is essentially the project that this award is supporting. So as I mentioned earlier, we've worked with girls in exposing them and providing them with job shadow opportunities and internships in a variety of different sectors and industries. And so we saw the opportunity here with 31 million jobs available in the construction industry, and the fact that they are in this industry looking towards women to fill them, we thought, why not our girls and why not now? And why not be more intentional about exposing them and starting to pipeline them into careers in this particular industry? So the Pink Hard Hats project was born. We've done a variety of guest speaker panels at our conference different schools, bringing these role models, doing actual hands-on STEM and practical applications of the work so that they can see what's available. We've also worked with Congresswoman Robin Kelly here in the area too to have a Black Women in Trades Day, where we were bringing together for the first time Black women who are in leadership positions in different parts of this industry and sector to have really meaningful conversations about what it takes, what are the challenges, and where are the opportunities in helping to pipeline more Black girls and Black women into this particular sector. So our work in this area, again, kind of like I mentioned before, is focusing on social emotional learning, providing them also with leadership development, and also these work-based opportunities to help increase the girls' exposure to careers and trades, provide them with professional development. For many of the successful women in the trades that we're able to bring in to this initiative to support the work. And then we want them to know that there's levels to this, right? Every young lady that gets into this doesn't have to necessarily work in the skilled trades, but my gosh, we want them to understand there's all these other businesses and companies that are out there that you can work other jobs like community engagement, marketing, human resources, and law, and making sure that these role models that we're exposing the girls to definitely represent that cross-section of different career opportunities. We sought out different partners like, elected officials like Congresswoman Robin Kelly, who is one of the co-chairs for the U.S. Congressional Caucus for Black Women and Girls, some of the construction unions like MCA Chicago, Chicago Women in Trades. Some of our board members actually work and support Millhouse Construction, Turner Construction, the Illinois School of Welding, Taylor Electric, She Builds, and et cetera. The list goes on. And part of our approach with helping the girls understand that these are great career opportunities is looking at the money. I mean, this is the United States of America. Everybody wants some level of comfort and gets a chance to design what that looks like. But the other thing in the United States of America is everybody understands it takes some type of employment to get there. And kids and our girls are no different. So they need to know what the hard numbers are and what the opportunities are. And so sometimes that's a part of our approach to introducing them to this industry, introducing them to these careers, and also making sure after we've done some market research with some advertising execs, how do we make it attractive to this community of girls? And also a side target group of their moms too. So one of the things that we've done is put together flyers and talk about and position it when we're out working with girls doing recruitment for the Polished Pebbles program. One, we pitch Polished Pebbles as a program that will help you get a job. And for many of our girls, not just in high school, but our middle schoolers, as I've shared with you, money is critically important to all of these families. And so that is a source of buy-in. But we try and give them attractive flyers where you can see the dollars on there. And then we kind of slyly add in the pink hard hat there as well. And you can see, here's a pink hard hat lady that is dressed up in a career, in a suit. So pink hard hat ladies can be CEOs, they can be leaders, they can work in the office, they can also work in the skilled trades, and just letting them know that these opportunities are there. Now, I want to make this point before we move on as well. This is just one way, after we've done some market research, looking at the communities that we serve to attract the majority of the girls and a majority of women to even think about considering these non-traditional careers for women. The other thing is about Polished Pebbles, our curriculum, our programming is a living curriculum. When these role models come into the classroom, trust me, all of them are not wearing pink hard hats. They get to see a cross-section of women who live different lifestyles, who come from different backgrounds, different communities, who view the work differently. And so girls get a chance to see this is what hard hat life is like. And I can resonate with this individual and resonate with that individual. I like what she says that had an impact on me. Maybe I will consider learning more about this opportunity. Maybe at my school where they actually offer welding, I'll actually go to the orientation. And maybe I might actually consider using that or choosing that as a major. And so the other piece that we're looking to do, again, thinking about providing girls with exposure, with role models, letting them know about it. We want to give them toolkits. And so we've developed a Every Girl's a CEO career and success guide that we consistently use as a part of our curriculum to provide girls, even now virtually, in the midst of COVID-19, as we're providing remote learning and virtual services, mentoring services for our program. We're shipping this book out to all of the girls as well to use as a companion guide to our work with Polished Pebbles and in the Pink Hard Hat program as well. So ladies, that is my presentation today. I'm trying to get back up here so I can stop sharing my screen. Here we go. Oh, stop the share. All right. So I'm appreciative of the opportunity, appreciative of your time, and looking forward to hearing more if there's any questions as well.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Cindy, any questions?
Just one, really. What criteria do you use for acceptance into the program?
So we actually partner with schools and communities in a variety of different ways. So we actually over the years have been fee-for-service contractors with City of Chicago, Illinois State Board of Ed, Cook County, or we work directly with the public school districts, or even at the building level. And then with grant opportunities like this, we're actually able to bring programming to schools. So sometimes it is a mix of kids who voluntarily agree and their parents to put them in the program. And sometimes, some cases, schools will make recommendations and also kind of incentivize students to participate in the program. So there's really no one way of entry into Polished Pebbles. And as much as we can, we provide a space for all the students that we can.
Thank you.
Barbara, can I ask the one kind of universal question?
Yes.
Can we take a little time, or?
I think.
Thank you.
So,
as you devised your research, how does your own experience reflect the questions you asked and answered, you presumed, and then what surprises you? The answers you presumed and what surprised you?
Well, I think, actually when I go back and think about, so I kind of mentioned earlier in the presentation, my own kind of thoughts and dispositions about who I was as a girl and what inspired me. When I wrote this last book, Our Career Success Guide, Every Girl's a CEO, I wrote it because, and I have that title of Every Girl's a CEO, because when we're sitting at the table often, we're trying to encourage girls to say, oh, ComEd or this company or that company, they have internships. Let's bring you in and kind of prep you to get you ready for the experience. Sometimes this is a community of girls who do not recognize their strengths because they're not in position sometimes to have people so into them, to nurture them, to uplift them. If they see representations of themselves in the media, it does not speak positively about who they are and that they're strong. So that's one of the things that we had to come up with, is recognizing that every one of these girls may be somewhat different, but there's this need to affirm girls and this innate ability of leadership and opportunities, and that you can take advantage of it and you have what it takes. Now, I'm a young lady that I came from a 2-parent household, that they were able to support me and nurture me, and both of my parents were also college educated, but there was still this need at 6th grade and 7th grade and 8th grade, even in high school, to sow into me, to uplift me, to encourage me about my innate CEO leadership skills. We find that consistently, often, we're having to do that and affirm that for every girl. And so that's what we've kind of seen over the years, is that every girl has a different experience, and they come from different backgrounds, but we find this need to help support and uplift girls in their confidence and their esteem about their ability to achieve and take these necessary milestones on this pipeline to their future career. And so that's been a part of it, is us being vulnerable as leaders about some of our own experiences, but also being very attentive to paying attention to the 5,000 girls that we've worked with over 11 years, to see that these are some consistent things that we need to encourage every girl and let them know that they're already a CEO and that they already possess everything that they need to be successful in their current situation and also in their future.
a couple more questions. Is there a website where people can get more information?
Absolutely. So they can find more information about Polished Pebbles at www.polishedpebbles.com. You can follow us on all the social media, Facebook, Instagram, and then you can follow me as well at K Fair the Mentor.
How many Chicago girls are there in the Pink Hat program?
Currently, what we're doing is we have a core program at Simeon High School, which we serve about a max of 30 girls there. And then we also have a feeder elementary school where we serve about 20 girls there as well too. But what we've worked to do with the Pink Hard Hats Project is be intentional about at least including one Pink Hard Hats activity in every single one of our school partners. So we serve on average about 500 girls a year. So we work to expose every single one of our girls, even if it's not at our core Pink Hard Hats schools like Simeon and our elementary school, to make sure that they all get at least one guest panel, at least one Pink Hard Hats experience to get a chance to see and be exposed to these possibilities.
Okay, Cindy.
Thank you. Can I ask both Kate and Marguerite, how does their own experience affect the questions you ask? Kate, or Marquita, I'm sorry, I probably just butchered your name. As you devised your research, how does your own experience affect the questions you asked and answered? Did they answer what your presumption was, and what surprised you?
So my personal experience with, if I'm thinking about both legs of my research, one around the sexual health and well-being of Black girls, and then also my curiosity around the role that fathers play, I would say definitely sexual health and well-being was begun through the work that I had done with community partners and with girl groups and after school programs. And in one of those, during that same time that I depicted that picture, I also hosted a miniature conference in a community in South LA, where I derived feedback from Black girls, mostly Black girls that were a part of this conference. It's about 60 girls. And they had questions about their sexual health and how they were to get the resources that they need. And as a result of those questions, I became more curious about access to resources in communities that mirrored that particular community. As far as father involvement, in that same community, I worked closely with community partners around a range of different interventions that matter to certain issues in the community. And at that time, there was a lot of Black girls that I noticed that seemed to be getting pregnant or had some type of experience around their own sexual health needs. And so I was in the midst of a conversation with fathers at the time, and I began to poll fathers' ideas about their role in their daughters' lives based on what those fathers had shared with me. And we continued with these conversations because there were several father involvement initiatives at the time that allowed me to somehow probe questions about their role in their daughters' lives, as well as what they believe fathers' roles are in other people's lives. And so I then reflected on my own experience with my dad and how his input was very different from the input that I received from my mom around my own well-being and taking care of myself. And so in the research in this pilot study, some of that has been affirmed, that daughters are receiving a very unique type of communication from their dads than they have not received or had not received from other women in their lives, including their mothers.
Thank you. Thanks, Marquita. Cindy, I think Kate Brunk had to leave the program. I think she had another engagement.
So we're done then. I have no more questions.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to wrap this up just for everybody. And I just want to say that, first of all, I want to thank everyone for attending. So all of you out there, all of you listeners, all of you who listened to these dynamite women, you need to all be clapping. You need to just give all of them a round of applause. It's been a most interesting, most informative, and most educational morning. I want to thank Kate Brunk, Marquita Dorsey, Michelle Friedner, and Kelly Farr, who've given us splendid programs. We all wish you the best. We know you'll be dynamite, even more if that's possible. And thank you so much for sharing your work and all that you do with us. I also want to thank the Jane Addams Online Branch, especially Cindy Anderson, Jennifer Urish, and Kate Scragg for setting up this Zoom, this webinar. And I want to thank the Chicago branch, especially Megan Mosier for introducing our branch. Thank you to everyone, and all of you are fabulous. We all wish you the best, and we're very proud of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.